The clock above the entrance read 10:58 p.m. as Mark swiped his badge and pushed through the employee doors of Walmart. The graveyard shift was a rhythm he knew well, quiet aisles, humming lights, and a kind of half-life that existed between stocking shelves and waiting for dawn. For years he told himself it suited him. Fewer crowds, fewer conversations, fewer eyes watching him. But tonight, the silence felt different. He could already feel it pressing against his chest. Sarah wasn't there yet. She was scheduled to start her shift 15 minutes later, and Mark thought about the way she had kissed him earlier that evening, if you could even call it a kiss. Just a brush of lips, distracted, her eyes darting past him as if her mind was elsewhere. It had been like that all week. He tried to shake it off. Stress, he muttered under his breath, pulling the pallet jack into the first aisle. Bills, long hours, nothing more. The wheels squeaked against the tile, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like an endless swarm of flies. Walmart at night had its own heartbeat, steady, mechanical, soulless. But Mark carried another rhythm inside him tonight, one that beat with suspicion and unease. He remembered how Sarah used to linger near him during their shifts, sneaking small smiles, passing jokes under her breath. Lately, though, she had drifted. She spent more time in the break room, more time laughing with Jason, the young stocker who joined 6 months ago. Mark had noticed, though he told himself it was harmless. She was friendly, that was all. She had always been friendlier than him. "Hey, man." Mark turned. It was Paul, another night shift worker, waving as he passed with a stack of boxes. "Hey," Mark replied flatly. "You good?" Paul asked, pausing for a second. Mark forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just another night." But it wasn't. Deep down, he knew it. He bent to slice open a cardboard box, the utility knife catching the light. His reflection in the shiny surface of a packaged toaster looked pale, drawn. He hadn't been sleeping well, and the tension with Sarah only grew heavier each night. Every argument ended the same, her brushing him off, him left staring at the wall, wide awake, wondering what had changed. He pushed the thought aside and focused on his task. The aisles were empty, the only sound his own breathing and the faint pop of distant intercom announcements. From the corner of his eye, he saw Sarah finally arrive, her blue vest catching the light as she walked past him. She didn't wave. She didn't even glance his way. Something in his stomach sank. "Long night already?" she asked casually as she stopped to grab her handheld scanner from the counter. Mark nodded, studying her. "Yeah. You okay?" "Fine," she answered too quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just tired." He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that it really was nothing. But the way she avoided his eyes told him otherwise. Hours passed in mechanical routine, stock, straighten, repeat. Mark caught himself glancing toward the break room door every time. The sound of Sarah's laughter still lingered in Mark's ears as he pushed his cart toward the back of the store. He told himself he was imagining things, that his exhaustion was twisting ordinary moments into something darker. But then, as he passed the employee hallway, he heard it again, clearer this time, paired with a lower male voice. Mark slowed, pressing his hand against the cool metal of the doorframe. The voices came from the break room. Inside, Sarah sat across from Jason at one of the round tables. A half-empty soda can rested between them. Jason leaned in, gesturing animatedly with his hands, as Sarah covered her mouth to stifle another laugh. Mark's stomach tightened. "Come on. You can't seriously think that," Jason was saying, his grin wide. Sarah shook her head, her ponytail swaying. "I do. I swear. You don't even know how stubborn he can be." Mark couldn't hear the rest. The words blurred together, muffled by the blood rushing in his ears. He shouldn't be standing there, shouldn't be eavesdropping like some jealous fool. And yet, His feet felt cemented to the floor. Jason leaned back in his chair, chuckling. "You're impossible." Sarah smiled, an easy, unguarded smile Mark hadn't seen directed at him in weeks. Mark's throat went dry. He stepped away quickly before either of them could notice him, his palms damp. In the quiet aisle, he gripped the cart handle so tightly his fingers ached. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, just co-workers joking around. Sarah was friendly with everyone. Jason was young, charming, the type who made jokes to lighten the night shift. But still, something about the way she looked at him, it gnawed at him. Later, as he stocked cans under the cold glare of fluorescent light, Sarah walked past him. The scent of her shampoo trailed after her, familiar, yet distant. He glanced up, searching her face for some sign, but she didn't meet his eyes. She just kept walking, phone in hand, thumbs moving quickly across the screen. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, his voice low. She stopped, hesitating for only a moment before answering. "Yeah, just texting my sister." But Mark knew her sister never texted this late. The lie landed sharp, slicing through the thin thread of trust still holding them together. He forced a nod. "All right." As she walked away, Mark noticed Jason watching her from the other end of the aisle. Their eyes met briefly before Jason looked down, smirking as if he hadn't been caught. Mark's chest burned with something he couldn't name. Jealousy, anger, fear. Maybe all three. He wanted to confront her right there, demand the truth, but his voice lodged in his throat. Instead, he returned to stacking cans, his hands shaking so badly a row of soup toppled to the floor. The clang echoed through the empty aisle like a warning bell. "Careful, man," Paul called from across the store, but Mark barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere, stuck in the break room, replaying the sound of Sarah's laughter and the way she leaned just a little too close to Jason. The night crawled on. Every time Sarah and Jason crossed paths, Mark noticed the lingering glances, the hushed words, the way her lips curved into a smile he hadn't earned in months. By the time his shift ended, he was exhausted, but not from the work. It was the weight pressing down on him, the suspicion that had taken root. As he sat in his car in the empty lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, Mark told himself he was overreacting. He just needed sleep. Tomorrow would be better. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something was breaking. And once cracks begin, glass only shatters deeper. The sun was beginning to rise as he drove home, the pale light washing the world in grey. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. The early morning sun stretched pale across the horizon, but Mark barely noticed. His thoughts replayed the break room, Sarah's laughter, Jason's grin, the ease between them that cut him deeper than any blade could. By the time he parked outside their small house, his chest felt heavy, as if the walls themselves would close in once he stepped through the door. Sarah was already inside, her uniform vest tossed over a chair. She stood in the kitchen, pouring cereal into a bowl, as if the night had been nothing more than routine. Mark lingered in the doorway, watching her, trying to decide if the woman before him was still the same one he'd married. "Did you have fun tonight?" he asked finally, his voice flat. Sarah glanced up, startled. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark stepped closer, his shoes echoing softly against the linoleum. "I heard you. Laughing. With Jason." She rolled her eyes, setting the cereal box down harder than necessary. "So now I can't laugh at work?" "That's not what I'm saying," Mark pressed, though his throat tightened with every word. "It's the way you looked at him. Like—" He stopped himself. The rest felt too raw, too humiliating to say aloud. Sarah's face hardened. "Like what, Mark? He tells a stupid joke and I laugh, that's all. You're reading into things that aren't there." His jaw clenched. "Then why do I feel like I don't even exist to you anymore?" For a moment, Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and suffocating. The refrigerator hummed. A spoon clinked against the ceramic bowl. Sarah's eyes darted away, as though she couldn't bear to meet his. "You're tired," she said finally, her tone sharp, dismissive. "You're making something out of nothing." Mark's chest burned. "Don't do that. Don't act like I'm crazy. I'm not." She stopped, exhaling loudly. "God, you're so paranoid lately. Do you even hear yourself?" His hands balled into fists at his sides. "I just want the truth, Sarah." Her shoulders slumped, her face softening for just a second before hardening again. "The truth is that you don't trust me, and that's your problem, not mine." The words cut deep, sharper than she realized. Mark turned away, running a hand through his hair. He hated the way his doubts twisted inside him, hated the guilt that followed immediately after. What if she was right? What if he was paranoid, letting sleepless nights and exhaustion turn shadows into monsters? But then he remembered Jason's smirk, Sarah's laugh, the way she'd lied about texting her sister. The image tightened around his chest until breathing felt like a struggle. He slammed his hand against the counter, startling her. "Something's wrong, Sarah. I know it. And you can't keep pretending otherwise." Her eyes flashed. "Stop it! You're suffocating me with this constant suspicion. I can't even breathe around you anymore." The words hung between them like smoke, toxic and lingering. Mark stared at her, stunned. Was this what their marriage had become? Two people trapped in the same house but living in different worlds. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap widening between them, but his feet stayed rooted. Instead, Sarah turned away, carrying her bowl into the living room. The sound of the television flicked on a moment later, drowning out the silence he'd been left with. Mark leaned against the counter, his body trembling. He hated himself for doubting her, for accusing her, for letting paranoia sink its claws into his mind. But beneath the guilt, something darker stirred. The fear that she wasn't dismissing him out of frustration. She was dismissing him to hide something. As the hours dragged on, neither of them spoke. The house felt colder than usual. His chest ached with a single truth. Their marriage was hanging by a thread, and if it snapped, he wasn't sure what pieces of himself would remain. The next night, Mark arrived at Walmart with heavy eyes and a heavier heart. The argument with Sarah still echoed in his chest, sharp and unfinished. She hadn't spoken to him much that day, just a few clipped answers, her tone brittle, her gaze elsewhere. He told himself to let it go, but something inside him refused to rest. By midnight, the store had slipped into its usual hush, aisles lined with neatly stacked goods that masked the chaos beneath his skin. Mark pushed a cart of stock toward the back, but his attention wasn't on the shelves. It was on Sarah. She had already vanished once. 20 minutes gone, no sign of her. When she finally reappeared, she carried nothing, no boxes, no equipment, just her phone tucked quickly into her vest pocket. Mark's chest tightened. He started noticing patterns. Each time Sarah drifted away, Jason was nowhere to be found either. Aisle 7, empty. The electronics section, empty. Their shifts seemed to dissolve at the same points, as if choreographed. Mark pulled a small notebook from his pocket, hidden beneath the flap of his vest. He flipped it open, jotting down the time. 12:43 a.m. Sarah gone. Jason not in aisle. The act steadied him, gave form to the chaos in his mind. He needed proof, something more than laughter and suspicion. Each line he wrote was like a thread tying down the whirlwind inside him. Still, dread coiled tighter with every note. At 1:10 a.m. he saw Jason heading toward the back hallway, glancing over his shoulder before slipping through the door. 2 minutes later, Sarah followed, moving quickly, her eyes darting left and right. Mark froze, the pen trembling in his hand. He scribbled down the time. 1:12 a.m., both in back hallway. The words stared back at him, black ink burning into the page. He stood there for a long moment, debating whether to follow. His feet itched to move, but fear rooted him in place. What if he found nothing? Worse, what if he found something he couldn't unsee? The store around him blurred into white noise. The hum of the lights, the steady beep of forklifts, the occasional crackle of the intercom, all of it faded beneath the pounding in his ears. When Sarah returned 25 minutes later, her hair slightly out of place, Jason came back 5 minutes after her. Neither carried boxes. Neither explained where they had been. Mark's hands shook as he wrote, 1:37 a.m. Sarah returns. Jason later. Empty-handed. He wanted to confront her right there, demand the truth in front of everyone, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he turned down the nearest aisle, gripping the cart so hard his knuckles blanched. "Hey, Mark!" Paul's voice called out, casual as always. "You seen Jason? Need help with the heavy stuff?" Mark forced his tone steady. "No, haven't seen him in a while." Paul shrugged and moved on, none the wiser. Mark leaned against the shelf, trying to steady his breath. His notebook burned in his pocket, each entry like a weight dragging him deeper. He couldn't shake the feeling that truth was crouching just out of sight, waiting for him to gather the courage to face it. The hours crawled by. Each time Sarah left, Jason vanished too. The truth wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. It was pulling him toward it step by step, into the backroom where silence covered sins. And soon he would follow. Mark had filled his notebook with pages of times, names, and observations, but ink wasn't enough anymore. Each night, his suspicion grew heavier, pressing against his ribs until breathing felt like work. The numbers on the page weren't proof. They were just scratches, desperate attempts to hold back the storm. What he needed was certainty. What he needed was the truth. It came to him one night, just after 2 a.m. Madis, when the store was at its quietest. A strange stillness hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of refrigeration units and the occasional crackle of the intercom. Mark noticed Sarah slip away again, her steps quick and cautious. Moments later, Jason vanished down the same hall. Mark's pulse quickened. He abandoned his cart, wiping his damp palms against his vest. His legs carried him forward before his mind caught up. For weeks he had stood frozen, afraid of what lay beyond the silence. Tonight, he followed. The employee corridor was narrow, lined with dull beige walls and flickering lights. Mark's shoes squeaked faintly on the linoleum, and he winced at the sound. Every step felt too loud, too risky, as though the shadows themselves might betray him. Ahead, faint giggles echoed, a high, stifled sound, followed by the low rumble of a man's voice. Mark stopped, heart pounding so hard it rattled in his chest. His fingers grazed the notebook in his pocket, as if the scribbled evidence could give him courage. But notes meant nothing now. He pressed forward, deeper into the maze of storage aisles where towers of cardboard loomed like silent witnesses. The smell of dust and detergent filled the air. Somewhere beyond, laughter floated again, softer this time, as though hidden behind walls. Mark turned a corner and froze. At the end of the aisle stood the door to the restricted backroom, a heavy steel slab, its paint chipped around the edges, a faded sign reading "Authorized personnel only." The sound was clearer now. Muffled giggles, the scuff of shoes on concrete, whispers that carried just enough to twist Mark's gut. He felt his throat tighten. For a long moment, he just stood there staring at the door. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But the laughter, it wasn't innocent. He knew that laugh. It was the one Sarah used to give him when they were first dating, soft and playful, reserved for private moments. Mark's hand shook as he reached for the handle. It was cool, slick with the sweat from his trembling grip. His reflection flickered in the small metal plate bolted to the door, pale and hollow-eyed. "Don't do this," he whispered to himself, voice cracking. "You don't want to know." But he did. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to bury his head in routine and let suspicion remain just that. Yet the silence on the other side of the door, broken by bursts of hushed laughter, pulled him closer, like a cruel magnet. He closed his eyes for a second, forcing air into his lungs. His chest rose and fell in jagged rhythm. In his mind, he saw Sarah at their kitchen table, dismissing his questions, calling him paranoid. He saw Jason's smirk in the aisle, smug and careless. The truth was here, just inches away. Mark's knuckles whitened as he tightened his grip. The handle resisted, locked tight, but his hand stayed there, pressing, testing. His pulse hammered louder with his breath came shallow now. One more twist, one more ounce of pressure, and the thin barrier between suspicion and truth would break forever. His hand trembled as he began to turn. The handle groaned beneath Mark's trembling grip. For a second, he thought the lock would hold, preserving the barrier between suspicion and certainty. But then it gave way with a reluctant click, the heavy door inching open. A thin slice of light spilled out, cutting across his shoes like a blade. He hesitated at the threshold, his breath shallow, his body taut with dread. Every fibre of him begged to turn back, to let the mystery rot in the shadows where it belonged. But his legs, stubborn and heavy, moved him forward. He pushed the door wider. The back room stretched before him. Cold concrete walls, stacks of boxes, a faint buzzing from the overhead fluorescent light. And there, in the dim glow, the scene unfolded. Sarah. Her laugh, low, intimate, curled through the air like smoke. She was pressed against Jason, their bodies close, entangled in a way that left no room for doubt. Jason's hand rested on her waist, sliding with a familiarity that made bile rise in Mark's throat. Her face tilted upward, eyes closed, lips parted in a smile that had once belonged only to him. Mark's heart stopped. For a moment the world seemed to collapse inward, shrinking to the narrow space between his pounding chest and the sight before him. The sound of his own pulse filled his ears, drowning out everything else. His stomach clenched as though struck, and the air caught in his lungs, refusing to release. He wanted to shout. He wanted to run. But he couldn't move. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting the scene in sharp, broken flashes, each stutter of brightness burning the betrayal deeper into his memory. Jason's laugh, low and satisfied, mixed with Sarah's softer giggle, the sound so familiar it split Mark's chest wide open. Time slowed. He noticed details he wished he could erase, the way Sarah's hand curled into Jason's shirt, the tilt of her head, the flush on her cheeks. Jason's eyes half closed, a grin of possession spreading across his face. The intimacy was undeniable, painted in gestures more damning than words could ever be. Mark's throat burned, his body trembling from the inside out. Rage surged, wild and consuming, battling against the raw weight of heartbreak. It was as though his soul had been torn in two, one half screaming in fury, the other weeping in silence. He had imagined this moment in nightmares, but reality was worse. There was no dramatic revelation, no confrontation with raised voices, just quiet treachery, cruel in its simplicity. Mark stumbled back, his shoulder hitting a stack of boxes that rattled with the impact. The sound broke the spell. Sarah's eyes flew open, her smile vanishing in an instant. Jason's hand dropped, his head whipping toward the door. For a heartbeat, no one moved. 3 pairs of eyes locked, the silence thick enough to smother. "Mark!" Sarah's voice cracked, fragile, almost unrecognizable. His name on her lips sliced through him. He flinched as though struck, his fists clenching at his sides. Words trembled on his tongue but refused to form. Jason stepped forward, his expression shifting from shock to a forced calm. It's not, he began, but the lie died in his throat. Even he knew there was no hiding what Mark had seen. The truth hung in the air, undeniable, suffocating. Mark's gaze darted between them, searching Sarah's face for any sign of regret, any flicker that what he saw wasn't real. But she just stood there, pale and trembling, her lips parted in a silence that screamed louder than any confession. The walls of the backroom seemed to close in, the buzzing light drilling into his skull. Mark's chest rose and fell in jagged bursts, his breath sharp and uneven, his vision blurred at the edges, hot tears stinging but refusing to fall. "This," he whispered, voice raw and broken. "This is what you've been hiding." Neither of them answered. Sarah took a step forward, her hand half reaching for him, but Mark recoiled as if her touch would burn him alive. The space between them became an unbridgeable chasm. He had crossed the threshold, and now there was no going back. The image seared itself into his mind. Sarah's laugh, Jason's hand, the betrayal etched in their closeness. It was permanent, irreversible. Something inside him shifted then, a breaking point sharp as glass. The man who entered the back room was not the same as the one who stood there now. Mark turned, his breath ragged, and staggered toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he carried the weight of a shattered world on his shoulders. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Behind him, Sarah called his name again, her voice trembling, desperate. Jason muttered something low, defensive, but the words dissolved into the buzzing silence. Mark gripped the cold handle, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the aisle. The laughter was gone, replaced by a void so deep it echoed inside him. And in that silence, a dark certainty took root. Nothing would ever be the same again. Mark's hand slipped from the cold door handle as he turned back into the room. The sight of Sarah clutching her shirt closed, Jason standing half a step in front of her, like some protector, ripped through his restraint. He stormed forward, every step pounding against the concrete like thunder. "You—" His voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "You disgust me." Sarah flinched, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "Mark, please. Don't you dare say my name," he shouted, spittle flying with the force of it. His chest heaved, his face burning crimson. "Not after what I just saw. Not after you." His throat tightened, strangling the words. Jason raised his hands, palms open, as if trying to calm a wild and Imal. "Mark, listen. This isn't what it looks like." Mark laughed, sharp and bitter, a sound more like a sob twisted into rage. "Not what it looks like. You had your hands on my wife. I saw everything." His voice fractured, fury laced with heartbreak. "Do you think I'm blind?" The silence afterward was suffocating. The buzzing of the overhead light seemed louder than their breaths. Sarah took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "Mark, it was a mistake. I didn't mean... a mistake." He snapped his gaze to her, eyes wide and bloodshot. "Mistakes are spilling coffee, or forgetting the groceries. What you did is betrayal." His fist slammed against a stack of boxes, sending them rattling. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Sarah recoiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I love you, Mark. Please don't do this here. Love me." His voice was a jagged knife, cutting through her plea. "If this is love, then I'd rather have nothing." Jason stepped closer, lowering his voice, trying to inject calm into the chaos. "Man, you need to take a breath. Let's talk this out. We don't have to—" Mark spun on him, rage boiling over. "Don't you dare talk to me like you know what's best. You've been sneaking around behind my back, taking what's mine. You're a coward. A snake." Jason's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "Simple?" Mark's voice shook with fury.
You think I don't see it? The late-night shifts, the whispers, the way you look at her. You've been laughing at me this whole time." The room vibrated with tension, as though the air itself might shatter.
Sarah sobbed, clutching her arms around herself. "Please, both of you, stop. This isn't who we are." Mark turned to her, eyes blazing. "Who we are? You made sure of that the moment you chose him. There is no we anymore." His words struck her like a slap. She staggered back against the wall, her knees trembling. Jason moved to steady her, but Mark lunged forward, shoving him hard against the metal shelving. Boxes toppled, crashing to the floor in a thunder of cardboard and plastic. Jason's hand went to his chest where Mark had shoved him, his breath ragged. "Don't do this, man. Think about what you're doing." Mark loomed over him, fists clenched, his voice low and venomous. "What I'm doing? I'm finally seeing the truth, and it's tearing me apart." Sarah rushed forward, her palms pressed against Mark's chest, trying to hold him back. "Please stop. You're scaring me." The words pierced him, but instead of softening, they hardened the fire in his eyes. "Good. Maybe now you'll feel a fraction of what you've done to me." Jason shoved him off suddenly, his own restraint cracking. "Back off, Mark. This isn't going to fix anything." The two men stood chest to chest, the air vibrating with the possibility of violence. Their breaths came in sharp bursts, their eyes locked in a silent war. Sarah's cries filled the space, her voice breaking under the weight of panic. For a fleeting second, Mark saw his reflection in Jason's eyes. Not a betrayed husband, but a man undone, teetering on the brink of something irreversible. His pulse thundered, his fists shook, and the room swam with heat and shadow. The silence stretched, unbearable. And then, Mark let out a roar, raw and primal, the sound of a man breaking in half. The tension snapped, fragile as glass. What came next would not be words. It would be something darker, something that could never be undone, the roar that tore Mark's chest shattered the fragile silence. Before Jason could react, Mark's fist drove into his jaw with brutal force. Jason staggered back, crashing into the shelves. Boxes tumbled, plastic clattering to the floor like hollow echoes of the violence erupting within. "Stop!" Sarah's scream ripped through the chaos, but it was swallowed by the sound of another blow, Mark's knuckles cracking against Jason's cheek. Blood sprayed across the concrete, dark and sudden. Jason fought back. His fist connected with Mark's ribs, forcing a guttural grunt from him. The two men grappled, their bodies slamming into metal and cardboard, the sterile backroom now a battlefield. Rage drove Mark, each strike fueled by months of suspicion and the fresh wound of betrayal. Sarah darted forward, trying to pull Mark off, her hands clawing at his arm. "Please, Mark, stop. You'll kill him." But her words only fanned the flames. Mark spun, shoving her away with a force born of blind frenzy. She stumbled, crashing into a stack of sealed boxes. They toppled, pinning her briefly, her cry muffled beneath the collapse. Jason took the moment to lunge at Mark, tackling him to the ground. The concrete scraped Mark's back as Jason's hands wrapped around his throat, squeezing with desperate strength. Mark's vision blurred, black creeping at the edges. Panic flared, raw and primal. His hand shot out, fumbling blindly until his fingers wrapped around something hard. A box cutter dropped from an open carton. With a guttural cry, he swung. The blade slashed across Jason's forearm. Jason howled, his grip loosening, blood flowing in hot, dark streams down his arm. Mark rolled, reversing their positions, pinning Jason beneath him. His chest heaved, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. Jason's lips moved, his voice hoarse, gasping. "Mark, don't, please." But reason was gone. Mark plunged the blade down, once, twice. The sound was sickening, flesh giving way to steel. Jason's body convulsed, then stilled, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent plea that would never be answered. The box cutter slipped from Mark's trembling hand, clattering to the floor. His chest heaved as he stared down at Jason's lifeless body, blood pooling beneath, seeping across the concrete. "Dear God," Sarah's voice broke. She had freed herself from the fallen boxes, her hands trembling, her face pale as chalk. She staggered toward them, eyes wide with horror. Mark turned, his face streaked with sweat and crimson splatter. "You—" His voice cracked, more animal than man. "You made me do this." Sarah shook her head violently, backing away, her hands raised as if to ward him off. "No, Mark, please. We can fix this. We can tell them it was an accident." Her words barely pierced the haze of red clouding his mind. Betrayal and rage still thundered through him, louder than reason, louder than mercy. The image of her laughter with Jason, her smile, Jason's hands, every detail stabbed at him. "Fix this?" His voice broke into a ragged laugh. "You broke everything." He lunged forward. Sarah screamed, darting for the door, but Mark caught her arm. She twisted, fighting, nails clawing at his skin, drawing blood. Her desperation was wild, primal, but Mark's grip was iron. He shoved her against the concrete wall, the back of her head striking with a dull thud. She gasped, dazed, her knees buckling. Mark's hands closed around her throat, pressing hard. Her eyes locked on his, wide and glistening, pleading silently. Tears streamed down her face as her lips parted, gasping for breath. "Mark," she choked, barely a whisper. For a fleeting heartbeat, his grip loosened. A flicker of the woman he had once loved, the life they had shared, tugged at him. But then Jason's bloodied face flashed again in his mind, and his fingers tightened. Sarah's struggles weakened. Her arms flailed, then fell limp at her sides. The last breath rattled from her lungs, her body going slack beneath his hold. Mark stumbled back, releasing her. She crumpled to the floor beside Jason, their bodies lying twisted and broken on the concrete. The sterile backroom that had once smelled faintly of cardboard and detergent now reeked of iron and death. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Only Mark's ragged breaths broke the void. He looked down at his hands, smeared red, trembling uncontrollably. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice hollow, unrecognizable even to himself. He sank to his knees between the bodies, his chest heaving, eyes darting wildly as if the walls themselves were closing in. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, mocking him with its sterile hum. The once ordinary backroom was now a tomb, a place forever stained by his rage. Mark stared at the blood creeping toward his shoes, disbelief flooding him in waves. He had crossed the line. There was no undoing it now. And as the silence pressed harder, one thought buried itself deep in his mind. There was no way out. The hum of the fluorescent light faded behind him as Mark staggered through the backroom door. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, stiff and trembling. Each step down the empty aisle echoed unnaturally loud, as if the store itself knew what had just happened. His hands shook violently, still sticky with blood. He shoved them into his pockets, but the warmth clung to him like a curse. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, his throat dry as dust. Somewhere in the distance, the intercom crackled faintly, announcing a routine cleanup in another section of the store. Ordinary words. A normal shift, but nothing was ordinary anymore. Mark pushed through the sliding doors into the night. The cold air hit him hard, biting into his skin, yet it did nothing to steady the heat boiling inside. The parking lot stretched before him, eerily still under buzzing lamps. His car sat alone at the edge, a solitary shadow waiting for him. He fumbled with the keys, his fingers slick and unsteady, before collapsing into the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt foreign beneath his grip. For a moment he simply sat there, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, ringed with shadow. His face smeared with crimson streaks. "God," he whispered, barely audible. "What have I done?" The engine roared to life, loud enough to jolt him from his daze. He pulled out of the lot, his hands trembling against the wheel, his eyes darting to every passing light, as though someone might already be chasing him. But no sirens followed. No alarms rang. The world outside continued, silent and indifferent. He drove aimlessly through the dark streets. The town blurred past in streaks of neon signs and shuttered storefronts. His mind, however, was locked in a cruel loop. Sarah's laughter, soft, intimate, meant for Jason. Jason's hand on her waist. The sight of their bodies together. And then the final image, their still forms on the concrete, blood pooling in unnatural shapes. Each memory struck like a hammer blow, pounding his skull from the inside. His stomach twisted violently. He pulled over, flung the door open, and vomited onto the pavement, his body heaving until there was nothing left but bile and dry sobs. Leaning against the car, his chest convulsed with uneven breaths. The night was quiet, except for his choking gasps. A part of him wanted to scream, to tear at the sky for answers, but his voice was gone, swallowed by the silence. When he finally slid back into the seat, the clock on the dashboard glowed. 3:17 a.m. Just hours ago, life had been a fragile routine, clocking in, unloading boxes, Sarah's distant smiles. Now, everything was ash. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, as though pressure alone might anchor him. But nothing could. His mind fractured, torn between disbelief and crushing guilt. He replayed Sarah's final moments, her lips gasping for air, her eyes pleading with him. He remembered Jason's last cry, the shock frozen on his face. These visions twisted into something unbearable, leaving Mark clawing at his temples as though he could scrape them out. "I didn't mean," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to—" But the words dissolved, hollow lies even to himself. A red smear glistened on the wheel beneath his fingers. His own knuckles were split, raw and crusted with dried blood. He tried to wipe them clean on his jeans, but the stains only spread darker. The proof of what he had done clung to him, refusing to fade. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, closing his eyes. For a fleeting second he imagined waking up in bed, this entire night nothing more than a nightmare. But the stench of iron on his hands anchored him in reality. There was no waking, no undoing. The road stretched ahead, empty, lit only by cold street lamps. Mark shifted the car into drive, his hands trembling but steady enough to move. He didn't know where he was going. Home, the highway, nowhere at all. All he knew was that the silence inside the car was louder than any scream, and within that silence a single truth echoed like a verdict. There was no turning back. The silence didn't last long. Mark's wandering drive ended when red and blue lights cut through the night, bathing the empty road in colour. His chest seized, hands tightening around the wheel. For a brief second he thought about pressing the gas, fleeing into the dark, but exhaustion held him down. The truth had already caught up. A voice barked through the cruiser's loudspeaker. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them." Mark's body moved mechanically. He opened the door, the cold air rushing in, and raised his trembling hands. Blood still clung to his skin, dark against the flashing lights. The officers moved swiftly, pressing him against the hood, metal cuffs clamping around his wrists. The click of finality echoed louder than any word. "Mark Johnson, you're under arrest for homicide." The words tore through him. He closed his eyes, his throat tight but said nothing. There was nothing left to defend. The interrogation room was stark. Grey walls, a single table, the hum of a camera recording every detail. Mark sat slumped in the chair, his wrists shackled to the metal ring bolted to the table. Detective Harris leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "Tell me what happened in that back room." Mark stared at his hands. The dried blood cracked into lines that looked almost like scars. His lips parted, then closed. "Your wife and your co-worker," the detective pressed. "We found them. It wasn't an accident, was it? Mark's jaw tightened. His voice came out low, almost a whisper. I saw them. Together. Laughing. Touching. It was right there in front of me. The detective's eyes didn't waver. So you killed them. A silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Mark's shoulders sagged as the truth spilled. I didn't go in there planning to, I swear. But when I saw them... His voice cracked, thick with grief. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't me anymore. Detective Harris scribbled a note, his tone neutral. That's not an excuse. You know that. Mark's head bowed. A tear slipped down his cheek, cutting through the grime and blood. I loved her. Even when she pulled away, even when she lied. I thought if I held on long enough, it would be okay. But she chose him. And I... His voice faltered, swallowed by silence. The detective leaned back, folding his arms. The jury won't see a man in love. They'll see a murderer. 2 people dead because you couldn't control your rage. Mark didn't argue. He couldn't. The trial drew the town into the courthouse, the scandal too consuming to ignore. Every seat was filled, whispers rippling like static through the air as Mark was led in, shackles clinking. He kept his eyes low, refusing to meet the gazes that pierced him from every direction. The prosecutor painted him as a jealous, violent man, driven by obsession. Photographs of Sarah and Jason, smiling in life, flashed across the courtroom screen. The blood-stained box cutter was held up, its edge dulled by tragedy. The defense tried to cast doubt, speaking of betrayal, emotional collapse, the sudden break of a fragile mind. He is not a monster, his lawyer said, voice trembling. He is a man broken by love turned cruel. But the jury's faces remained grim, unmoved. When Mark finally spoke, the courtroom fell into silence. His voice was soft, hollow. I wish I could take it back. Every second of it. I wish I'd walked away instead of opening that door. But I didn't. And now Sarah and Jason are gone because of me. No sentence you give me will ever compare to that truth. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Guilty on 2 counts of murder in the 2nd degree. Mark closed his eyes. The words felt inevitable, carved into stone the moment he'd raised the blade. In his cell, nights stretched into endless silence. The concrete walls held no warmth, no comfort. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the loop of laughter, betrayal, and blood. The truth had come out, stripped bare in court, dissected for all to see. Sarah's infidelity, Jason's part in it, his own violence. But there was no vindication, no satisfaction, only ruin. Justice had been served, but the cost was unbearable. 2 lives lost, 1 life imprisoned, and a truth that destroyed them all. Mark whispered into the darkness, his voice cracking. There is no coming back. And the silence swallowed him whole.